It was in chapter 16. It was infuriating to be told what to do by civilians. Their voices, even when they called us for breakfast, enraged me so much that I would punch the wall of my locker or anything that I was standing next to. A few days earlier, we could have decided whether they would live or die. Because of these things, we refused to do anything that we were asked to do, except eat. We had bread and tea for breakfast, rice and soup for both lunch and dinner. The assortment of soups consisted of cassava leaves, potato leaves, okra, and so forth. We were unhappy because we needed our guns and drugs. At the end of every meal, the nurses and staff members came to talk to us about attending the scheduled medical checkups in the mini hospital at Benin School and the one-on-one counseling sessions in the psychosocial therapy center that we hated. As soon as they started speaking, we would throw bowls, spoons, food, and benches at them. We'd chase them out of the dining hall and beat them up. One afternoon, after we had chased off the nurses and staff members, we placed a bucket over the cook's head and pushed him around the kitchen until he burned his hand on a hot boiling pot and agreed to put more milk in our tea. Because of these things, we were basically left to wander aimlessly about our new environment for the entire first week. During the same week, the drugs were wearing off. I craved cocaine and marijuana so badly that I'd roll a plain sheet of paper and smoke it. Sometimes I searched the pockets of my army shorts, which I still wore, for crumbs of marijuana or cocaine. We broke into the mini hospital and stole some pain relievers, white tablets and off-white, and red and yellow capsules. We emptied the capsules, ground the tablets, and mixed them together. But the mixture didn't give us the effect we wanted. We got more upset day by day, and as a result, resorted to more violence. In the morning, we beat up people from the neighborhood who were on their way to fetch water at a nearby pump. If we couldn't catch them, we threw stones at them. Sometimes they dropped their buckets and as they ran away from us. We would laugh as we destroyed their buckets. The neighbors stopped walking near our center, as we had sent a few of them to the hospital. The staff members avoided us all the more. We began to fight each other during day and night. We would fight for hours in between meals, for no reason at all. During these fights, we destroyed most of the furniture and threw the mattresses out in the yard. We would stop to wipe the blood off of our lips, arms, and legs only when the bell rang for mealtime. At night, after we had exhausted fighting, we would bring our mattresses outside in the yard and sit on them quietly until morning arrived and it was time for breakfast. Every time we returned from breakfast, the mattresses we had brought outside the previous night were back in our beds. We would angrily bring them out again into the yard, cursing whoever had taken them inside. One night, as we sat outside of the mattresses, it began to rain. We sat in the rain, wiping it off of our faces and listening to its sound on the tile roof and the gushing of torrents onto the ground. It rained for only about an hour, but even after it had stopped, we continued sitting outside all night on the wet sponges that were once our mattresses. The following morning, when we returned from breakfast, the mattresses were still outside. It wasn't much of a sunny day, so they didn't dry by nighttime. We became angry and went to look for Pape, the man in charge of storage. He was an ex-military man with a wandering eye. When we found him, he demanded dry mattresses. You'll have to wait for the ones you left outside to dry, he said. We cannot allow a civilian to talk to us like that, someone said, and we all shouted in agreement and rushed at Pape. We unleashed blows on him. One of the boys stabbed his foot and he fell down, and he put his hands over his head as we kicked him relentlessly and left him lying on the floor, bleeding and unconscious. We shouted in excitement as we walked back to our veranda. Gradually, we became quiet. I was angry because I missed my squad and needed more violence. A security guy who was watching the center took Pape to the hospital. Several days later, Pape returned during lunch, limping but with a smile on his face. It's not your fault that you did such a thing to me, he said, as he strolled through the dining hall. This made us angry because we wanted the civilians, as we referred to the staff members, to respect us as soldiers who were capable of severely harming them. Most of the staff members were like that. They returned smiling after we hurt them. It was as if they had made a pact not to give up on us. Their smiles made us hate them all the more. My hands had begun to shake uncontrollably, and my migraines had returned with a vengeance. It was as if a blacksmith had an anvil in my head. I would hear and feel the hammering of metal in my head, and the unbearable sharp sounds made my veins and muscles sour. I cringed and rolled around on the floor or on my bed, or sometimes on the veranda. No one paid any attention, as everyone was busy going through their own withdrawal stages in different ways. Al-Haji, for example, punched the cement pillar of one of the buildings until his knuckles bled and his bone began to show. He was taken to the mini hospital and put to sleep for several days so he would stop hurting himself. One day we decided to break the glass windows in the classrooms. I do not remember why, but instead of finding rocks to break the windows like everyone else, I punched the glass with my fist. I managed to break several panes before my hand got stuck in the glass. I drew it out and began to bleed uncontrollably. I had to go to the hospital. My plan was to steal a first aid kit and treat myself, but the nurse was there. She made me sit on the counter as she removed the pieces of glass from my skin. She twisted her face whenever she was removing a piece of glass that was buried deep in my skin, but when she looked at me, I was still. She searched my face to see if I was in pain. She was confused, but continued to gently remove the pieces of glass from my bleeding hand. I didn't feel a thing. I just wanted to stop my blood from flowing. This is going to hurt, the nurse said when she was about to clean the cuts. What is your name? She asked as she dressed my hands. I didn't answer her. Come back tomorrow so I can change the bandage, okay? She began to rub my head, but I pushed her hand away and walked out. I didn't want to go back to the hospital the next day, but on the same day I fainted from a migraine while I was sitting on the veranda. I woke up in bed in the hospital. The nurse was wiping my forehead with a soaked cloth. I caught her hand, pushed her away, and walked out again. I sat outside in the sun, rocking back and forth. My entire body was aching, my throat was dry, and I felt nauseated. I threw up something green and slimy and then fainted again. When I woke up hours later, the same nurse was there. She handed me a glass of water. You can go if you want to, but I suggest that you stay in bed tonight, she said, pointing a finger at me, the way a mother would talk to a stubborn child. I took the water from her and drank it, and then threw the glass against the wall. The nurse leapt from her chair. I tried to get up to leave, but was unable to sit up in bed. She smiled and walked over to my bed and injected me. She covered me with a blanket and began sweeping up the broken glass. I wanted to throw the blanket off, but I couldn't move my hands. I was getting weaker. My eyelids grew heavier. I woke to the whispers of the nurse and someone else. I was confused, as I wasn't sure what day or time it was. I felt my head pulsating a little. How long have I been here? I asked the nurse, bandaging my hand on the side of the bed to get her attention. Banging my hand on the side of the bed to get her attention. Look who's talking, and be careful with your hand, she said. When I sat up a bit, I saw that there was a soldier in the room. I thought for a minute that he was there to take me back to the front lines, but when I looked at him again, I knew he was at the hospital for other reasons. He was clearly a city soldier, well dressed and without a gun. He was a lieutenant and supposedly there to check on how we were being treated, medically and psychologically, but he seemed more interested in the nurse. I was once a lieutenant, I thought. Junior lieutenant, to be precise. As a junior lieutenant, I had been in charge of a small unit made up of boys to carry out quick missions. The lieutenant and Corporal Gaddafi had selected all of my remaining friends, Alhaji, Kanye, Juma, and Mariba, to form the unit. And once again, we were back together. Only this time, we weren't running away from the war. We were in it, and we were out scouting potential villages that had food, drugs, ammunition, gasoline, and other things we needed. I would report our findings to the corporal, and then the entire squad would attack the village we had spied on, killing everyone so that we would stay alive. On one of our scouting expeditions, we accidentally came upon a village. We had thought that the village was more than 3 days away, but after only a day and a half of walking, we had begun to smell the scent of cooking palm oil in the air. It was a beautiful day. As summer was giving us its last sunshine. We immediately got off the path and walked in the bushes toward the village. When we began to see the thatched roofs, we crawled until we were closer to the village to be able to look at what was going on. There were a few gunmen lazily lounging about. Also, there were piles of bundles outside every house. It seemed that the rebels were getting ready to move out of the village. If we had gone back to the base to get the rest of the squad, we would have missed capturing their supply of food. So we decided to attack. I gave orders for everyone to deploy around the village at strategic positions from where we could see the entire place. Alhaji and I gave the 3 other boys a few minutes to take their positions before we started crawling even closer to the village to initiate the attack. The 2 of us went back to the main path and started crawling on either side of it. We had 2 RPG tubes and 5 propelled grenades. When we'd gotten close enough, and I had aimed my gun at the group that I had intended to start with, when Alhaji tapped me on the shoulder. He whispered that he wanted to practice his Rambo moves before we started firing. Before I said a word, Alhaji was already rubbing mud on his face, using a combination of saliva and some water from his backpack to wet the mud.